Hello. The Brazilian YouTube channel Our Spirita intends to create audiobooks based on the books of the Spiritist codification of Allan Kardeck in English, but in order to create something of quality, we ask for your help, whose native language is English, to contribute with your evaluation in the comments field regarding the quality of pronunciation, diction, reading speed, and whether the understanding of what is said was easy. The content is not our own, but rather from official books translated by experts. We would like you, if possible, to listen to this test audio created exactly for this purpose and tell us which country you are from, and give us your evaluation. We will be immensely grateful for your generous and kind participation and be absolutely certain that this will help many people around the world. We sincerely thank you for your valuable collaboration. The Spiritist book, The Principles of the Spiritism Doctrine and the Spiritualist Philosophy, containing the principles of the Spiritist doctrine, concerning the immortality of the soul, the nature of spirits and their relationships with humankind, moral laws, the present life, the future life, and the destiny of humanity, according to the teachings given by highly evolved spirits through several mediums, reserved and coordinated by Allan Kardeck, translated by Daryl W. Kimball with Marcia M. Says. International Spiritist Council. Original title, A Livre des Spirits. Paris, 1857. Translated by Daryl W. Kimball with Marcia M. Says. Translator's preface to the third edition. This third edition is a further refinement of the second edition, which was a thorough revision of the first. Since the publication of the first edition, we have translated, and the ISC has published the first editions of the other volumes of the Spiritist Codification and Mediums Book 2006, Heaven and Hell 2006, The Gospel According to Spiritism 2008, and Genesis 2009, as well as the additional work What is Spiritism 2010, and they will be revised as new editions are published. In the first two editions, we made a few comments about how we approached a number of grammatical issues, and we will reiterate them here. The authoritative French version was published in 1857, nearly 150 years ago. Apart from the challenge of translating from one language into another and overcoming the structural differences between the two, there were other challenges involving the time period differential. The first and greatest of these challenges was the problem of gender-neutral language. When referring to individuals, we address the problem by using plural pronouns as much as possible because they are gender-neutral, rather than the singular pronoun combinations he or she, him or her, his or her. When referring to a single spirit or soul, the neuter pronoun it was used, since, technically, spirits are sexless. Though sometimes the singular form is changed to the plural, nevertheless, we use the personal relative pronouns who and whom when referring to a single spirit or soul. Masculine pronouns were eliminated when referring to God, because Spiritism does not hold to the idea that God should be personified. God is viewed as the first causae questioner, one who works in creation strictly through established natural laws. Thus, the proper noun-God was used to replace the pronouns. In other instances, the singular man and all of its related pronouns were usually changed by employing the plural humans, human beings, individuals, etc., which were also used to replace the plural men. Our main goal was to hold as closely to Kardeck's original as possible without producing either a transliteration or a paraphrase, which is why we retained as many original terms as possible and adhere to the original style as much as the grammatical and structural differences between the two languages would allow. This edition also includes Anna Blackwell's preface to her version, which has served the English public since the 19th century. Her preface contains a short biography of Allan Kardeck, but we have modified it slightly by updating it into modern English. We suggest that the reader, who may be unfamiliar with Spiritism as coined and codified by Allan Kardeck, begin by perusing the table of contents to locate an area of particular interest, a question concerning reincarnation, prayer, the premature death of children, life after death, etc. and see how various high-order spirits address the issue. This will lead to further interest, at which time the reader should begin with Kardeck's introduction, essential for setting the whole body of knowledge as revealed by the spirits within the proper context and from their work through the entire book. Daryl Kimball, Rio de Janeiro, Brazil 2010. Anna Blackwell's preface to her version, updated into modern English by the translators. Hippolyte Léon Denis Draville, better known by his pen name Allan Kardeck, was born in Lyons on October 4, 1804 into an old family of Berg-en-Bresse, which for many generations had been honourably distinguished in the magistracy and at the bar. His father, like his grandfather, was an attorney of good standing and high character. His mother, who was remarkably beautiful, accomplished, elegant and amiable, was the object, on his part, of a profound and worshipping affection that remained unchanged throughout his entire life. Educated at the institution of Pestalozzi in Verdun Canton de Vaud, he acquired at an early age the habit of investigation and the freedom of thought of which his later life was destined to furnish so striking an example. Endowed by nature with a passion for teaching, he devoted himself from the age of 14 to aiding the studies of those of his schoolfellows who were less advanced than himself. He was so fond of botany that he would often spend an entire day in the mountains, walking 20 or 30 miles with a backpack in search of specimens for his herbarium. Born in a Catholic country but educated in the Protestant one, as a mere boy he began to meditate on the means of bringing about a unity of belief among the various Christian sects, a project of religious reform at which he labored in silence for many years but necessarily without success, since the elements of the desired solution were not in his possession at the time. Having finished his studies at Verdun, he returned to Lyons at age 24 with the intention of devoting himself to law. However, various acts of religious intolerance to which he unexpectedly found himself subjected led him to renounce the idea of preparing for the bar and to take up residence in Paris, where he occupied himself for some time in translating Telemachus and other standard French books for youth into German. Having finally determined what his career would be, in 1828 he purchased a large and flourishing educational establishment for boys and devoted himself to the work of teaching, for which, by his tastes and acquirements, he was peculiarly suited. In 1830, and at his own expense, he rented a large hall on Rue de Sèvres, where he offered courses consisting of free lectures on chemistry, physics, comparative anatomy, and astronomy. He continued these lectures over a period of 10 years. They were highly successful and were attended by an audience of over 500 persons of every social class, many of whom have since attained eminence in the scientific world. Always desirous to make education attractive as well as profitable, he invented an ingenious method of computation and constructed a mnemotechnic table of French history for enabling students to remember the remarkable events and discoveries of each reign. Some of the numerous educational works he published were a plan for the improvement of public instruction, which he submitted in 1828 to the French Legislative Chamber, which praised it highly but took no action with regards to it, a course of practical and theoretic arithmetic on the Pestalozzian system for the use of teachers and mothers 1829, a classical grammar of the French tongue 1831, a manual for the use of candidates for examination in the public schools with explanatory solutions of various problems of arithmetic and geometry 1848, normal dictations for the examinations of the Hôtel de Ville and the Sorbonne with special dictations on orthographic difficulties 1849. These works were highly regarded at the time of their publication and are still in use in many French schools. Their author continued to produce new editions of some of them at the time of his death. He was a member of several scholarly societies such as the Royal Society of Arras, which awarded him with the Prize of Honour in 1831 for a remarkable essay on the question, "What is a system of study most in harmony with the needs of the epoch?" For several years he was secretary to the Phrenological Society of Paris, and took an active part in the labours of the Society of Magnetism, giving much time to the practical investigation of somnambulism, trance, clairvoyance, and the various other phenomena connected with mesmerism. The following brief outline of his labors will suffice to show his mental activity, the variety of his knowledge, the eminently practical turn of his mind, and his constant endeavor to be useful to his fellow humans. Around 1850, when the phenomenon of table turning was grabbing the attention of Europe and ushering in other phenomena since known as Spiritist, he quickly defined the real nature of those phenomena as being evidence for the existence of an order of relationships that had until then been suspected rather than known, i.e., those that unite the visible and invisible worlds. Foreseeing the vast importance to both science and religion of such an extension of the field of human observation, he immediately began a careful investigation of the new phenomena. A friend of his had 2 daughters, who had become what are now called mediums. They were carefree, lively, amiable girls, who were fond of socializing, dancing, and amusement. When sitting by themselves or with their young companions, they habitually received communications in harmony with their worldly and somewhat frivolous dispositions. However, to the surprise of all concerned, it was discovered that whenever Kardeck was present, the messages transmitted through these young ladies acquired a very grave and serious character. When he asked the invisible intelligences what caused this change, he was told that spirits of a much higher order than those who habitually communicate through the 2 young mediums have come expressly for you and will continue to do so in order to enable you to fulfill an important religious mission. Much astonished at such an unexpected announcement, he immediately proceeded to test its truthfulness by drawing up a series of progressive questions in relation to the various problems of human life and the universe in which we find ourselves, and submitted them to his unseen interlocutors. He received the answers to these questions through the instrumentality of the 2 young mediums, who willingly consented to devote a couple of evenings every week to this purpose, and who thus obtained, through table rapping and planchette writing, the replies that have become the basis of the Spiritist theory, and which they were as little capable of appreciating as of inventing. When these conversations had been going on for nearly 2 years, he remarked to his wife one day, in reference to the unfolding of these views, which she had followed with intelligent sympathy, "It is a most curious thing. My conversations with the invisible intelligences have completely revolutionized my ideas and convictions. The instructions thus transmitted constitute an entirely new theory of human life, duty, and destiny, which appears to me to be perfectly rational and coherent, admirably lucid and consoling, and intensely interesting. I have a great mind to publish these conversations in a book, for it seems to me that what interests me so deeply might very likely prove interesting to others as well." His wife warmly approved of the idea, and so he then submitted it to his unseen interlocutors, who replied in the usual way that it was they who had suggested it to his mind, that their communications had been made to him, not for himself alone, but for the express purpose of being given to the world as he proposed to do, and that the time had now come for putting this plan into action. To the book in which you will embody our instructions, continue the communicating intelligences you will give, as being our work rather than yours, the title Oliver des Esprits the Spirit's Book. You shall not publish it under your own name, but under the pseudonym Allan Kardeck, an old Breton name in his mother's family. Keep your own name revealed for your own books already published, but take and keep the name we have now given you for the book you are about to publish under our orders, and, in general, for all the work that you will have to do to fulfill the mission, which, as we have already told you, has been confided to you by Providence, and which will gradually open before you as you proceed in it under our guidance. The book thus produced and published sold very quickly, winning converts not only in France, but all over the continent, and making the name of Allan Kardeck a household word to the readers who knew him only in connection with it. From that time onwards, he was called only by that name, except by his old personal friends, with whom both he and his wife always retained their family name. Soon after its publication, he founded the Persian Society of Psychological Studies, of which he was president until his death, and which met every Friday evening at his house for the purpose of obtaining from spirits, through writing mediums, instructions in the elucidation of truth and duty. Until his death, he also founded and edited a monthly magazine entitled La Revue Spirite, which was devoted to advocating the views set forth in the Spirit's book. Similar associations were quickly formed all over the world. Many published periodicals of varying degrees of importance in support of the new doctrine, and all of them transmitted to the Parisian society the most remarkable of the spirit communications they received. An enormous mass of spirit teaching, unique both in quantity and in the variety of the sources from which it was obtained, thus found its way into the hands of Kardeck, who studied, collated, and coordinated it with unwearied zeal and devotion over a period of 15 years. From the materials thus furnished to him from every quarter of the globe, he enlarged and completed the Spirit's book under the direction of the Spirits, by whom it was originally dictated. The revised edition of the book, which he published in 1857, see preface to the revised edition, has become the recognized textbook of the school of spiritualist philosophy so intimately associated with his name. From the same materials he subsequently compiled 4 other works: the Medium's Book, a practical treatise on mediumship and vocations, 1861, The Gospel according to Spiritism, an exposition of morality from the Spiritist point of view, 1864, Heaven and Hell, a vindication of the justice of the divine government of the human race, 1865, and Genesis, showing the concordance of the Spiritist theory with the discoveries of modern science and with the general tenor of the Mosaic record as explained by the Spirits, 1868. He also published 2 short treatises, entitled What is Spiritism? And Spiritism reduced to its simplest expression. It is to be remarked, in connection with the works just mentioned, that Kardeck was not himself a medium, and was therefore obliged to avail himself of the mediumship of others in obtaining the spirit communications from which they were evolved. The theory of life and duty, so immediately connected with his name and labours that it is often erroneously supposed to have been the product of his single mind or of the spirits in immediate connection with him, is therefore far less the expression of a personal or individual opinion than are any of the other spiritualistic theories propounded thus far. This is because the basis of the religious philosophy laid down in his works was not in any way the product of his own intelligence, but was as new to him as to any of his readers. It was progressively deduced by him from the concurrent statements of a legion of spirits through many thousands of mediums, who were unknown to each other and belonged to different countries and to every variety of social position. In person, Kardeck was somewhat under middle height and strongly built, with a large, brown, massive-haired, well-marked features, and clear grey eyes. He looked more German than French. Energetic and persevering, but of a temperament that was cautious, and an imaginative almost to coldness, incredulous by nature and by education, a close, logical reasoner and eminently practical in thought and deed, he was equally free from mysticism and enthusiasm. Devoid of ambition, indifferent to luxury and display, the modest income he had acquired from teaching and from the sale of his educational work sufficed for the simple style of living he had adopted, and allowed him to devote all the profits arising from the sale of his Spiritist books and from the Revue Spirite to propagating the movement he initiated. His excellent wife relieved him of all domestic and worldly cares, and thus enabled him to consecrate himself entirely to the work to which he believed himself to have been called, and which he pursued with unswerving devotion to the exclusion of all extraneous occupations, interests, and companionships from the time he first began it until he died. He made no visits beyond a small circle of intimate friends, and very rarely left Paris, spending his winters in the heart of the town in the rooms where he published his review, and his summers at the Villa Sager, a little semi-rural retreat which he had built and planted to be his home in his and his wife's old age, and which was located in the suburban region behind the Champ de Mars. The area is now crossed in every direction by broad avenues and is quickly being built over, but at the time it was a sort of wasteland that might still pass for the country. grave, slow of speech, and assuming a manner, yet not without a certain quiet dignity resulting from the earnestness and single-mindedness which were the distinguishing traits of his character, neither courting nor avoiding discussion, but never volunteering any remark upon the subject to which he had devoted his life. He gracefully received the innumerable visitors from every part of the world who came to converse with him in regard to the views of which he was the recognized exponent. He answered questions and objections, explained difficulties, and provided information to all serious inquirers, with whom he talked with freedom and animation, his face occasionally lighting up with a genial and pleasant smile, though his habitual sobriety of demeanor was such that he was never known to laugh. Among the thousands by whom he was thus visited were many of high rank in the social, literary, artistic, and scientific worlds. The Emperor Napoleon Roman III, whose interest in spirit phenomena was no mystery, sent for him several times and held long conversations with him at the Tuileries concerning the doctrines of the Spiritist book. Having suffered for many years from heart disease, Kardeck drew up the plans in 1869 for a new Spiritist organization that would carry on the work of spreading the doctrine after his death. In order to assure its existence, he gave it a legal and commercial status and was determined to make it a regularly comprised joint stock limited liability publishing and bookselling company to be constituted for a period of 99 years with power to buy and sell, to issue stock, to receive donations and bequests, etc. To this society, which was to be called the Joint Stock Company for the continuation of the works of Allan Kardeck, he intended to transfer the copyright of his Spiritist writings and of the Review Spirit. Allan Kardeck, however, was not destined to witness the realization of the project in which he took so deep an interest, and which has since been carried out with entire exactitude by his widow. On March 31, 1869, having just finished drawing up the constitution and rules of the society from which he foresaw that he would soon be removed, he was seated in his usual chair at his desk in his rooms on Rue Saint-Anne, and was tying up a bundle of papers when his busy life was suddenly brought to an end by the rupture of an aneurysm from which he had so long suffered. His passage from the earth to the spirit world, with which he had so closely identified himself, was instantaneous, painless, and without a sigh or a tremor, a most peaceful falling asleep and re-awakening, a fit ending for such a life. His remains were interred in the cemetery of Montmartre in presence of a great concourse of friends, many hundreds of whom assembled there every year on the anniversary of his decease, during which a few commemorative words are spoken in fresh flowers and wreaths, as is usual in continental graveyards, are laid upon his tomb. It is impossible to precisely ascertain the number of those who have adopted the views set forth by Allan Kardeck. They are estimated by themselves to be many millions, but they are at the least incontestably very numerous. The periodicals devoted to the advocacy of these views in various countries already number over 40, and new ones are constantly appearing. Kardeck's death has not slackened the acceptance of the views set forth by him, and which are believed by those who hold them to be the basis, but the basis only, of the new development of religious truth predicted by Christ, the beginning of the promised revelation of many things that have been kept hidden since the foundation of the world, and for the knowledge of which the human race was not ready at the time of that prediction. Anna Blackwell, Paris, 1876. Preface to the revised edition. In the first edition of this work, we announced that there would be a supplementary part comprised of all the issues which could not be fitted into that edition, or which later circumstances and investigation subsequently might bring to light. However, since those issues pertain to materials that had already been discussed and from which they had developed, to publish them in a separate volume would not actually represent a sequel. Therefore, we prefer to wait for the reprinting of the original in order to assemble all the parts together, and we also took advantage of the opportunity to arrange the book's contents more methodically, while at the same time eliminating duplications. As a result, this reprinting may be considered as a new work, although the principles of the first edition have undergone no change except for a few instances that comprise complements and explanations rather than true modifications. In spite of the diversity of the sources from which they have emanated, such conformity to the received teachings is an important fact for establishing the Spiritist science. Moreover, our correspondence has shown us that communications that are identical, if not in form, at least in substance, were obtained in different places, and occurred even before the publication of our book, a fact that has come to confirm and systematize them. History, in turn, shows that most of its principles have been professed by the most distinguished thinkers of ancient and modern times. This fact lends them additional sanction. The teachings regarding mediums and spirit manifestations make up an aspect of Spiritism that is somewhat different from the philosophy per se and can be the object of special study. Since that aspect has received considerable improvement after more experience has been acquired, we have decided to make a separate volume of it, containing the responses to all the questions related to manifestations and mediums, as well as to make several observations on practical Spiritism. This work will be a continuation of a supplement to the Spirits book. Allan Kardeck,